second when the spaceship passes, you'll be able to see the Earth. I can just about... Wait. It's all hammer. Always has been. I'm sorry, son.
Is it possible to make a country using only a hammer? Well, depending on who you ask, yes. But in that case, it's less using a literal hammer and more using the ideological stand-in of a hammer to represent the worker as part of a broader symbol intended to express proletarian solidarity. Anyway, you didn't come to this video for linguistic analysis of the communism logo, and statistically you probably didn't mean to come to this video at all, but whatever, don't care, cry more. Like with my previous hammer-based work, what we're going to do is use the hammer to interface with the world around us in order to create the composite parts of a larger whole. I did something similar in my video on using a hammer to create a functioning Turing machine, link in the description if you missed that. Before we get into it, we need to start by managing expectations. We can't make a country that legally exists, at least not in a way that the UN would be cool with, what with the fact that the country I'm in right now probably wouldn't be okay with me just taking a bunch of their land. Instead, what we're going to do is make a micronation, a sort of halfway house between an actual country and a creative project. Micronationalism as a hobby is pretty massive on the internet, and was the subject of an article I did for my other website, The Anti-Solipsist, and anyway, I need to stop plugging things, follow my Twitch. So what do we need to have a micronation? Most micronations, at least on the internet, appear to go by the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States, a convention signed by the International Conference of American States in 1933 and later grabbed by the UN in 1936, which, while not doing anything overtly in a legal sense because it mostly just restates an existing legal framework, does give us a reasonably decent place to start as far as having a country because it includes an easy 4-step plan. The convention says that a state as a person of international law should possess the following qualifications: A, a permanent population, B, a defined territory, C, government, and D, capacity to enter into relations with other states. The first two are pretty easy. Permanent population is step 1, and we don't even need the hammer for this step because I'm already here. Step 2 is to have a defined territory, and I guess this area will work. I went with this as the territory because it's small enough for me to manage, and also I can take a nap when I inevitably get bored of doing this. The harder part is steps 3 and 4, and now that I think about it, step 2 isn't really that easy either. It's not just territory, but defined territory that the convention asks for, and so I probably need to write a law or something that sets it up, but we can get to that later. For now, let's actually work on establishing the government. To determine what sort of government this microstate is going to have, we need to first decide its foundational ideology, because every instrument and institution of the state created thereafter is going to flow from those principles. Rephrased in a way that doesn't make me sound like I think I'm smart because I know long words, we need to make decisions about what principles we think are important. Do we value a stronger unitary state more than the rights of the citizenry to keep that state accountable? If so, we're probably looking at a system where elections are few and far between and civil freedoms are sharply curtailed, but which has a government that can act immediately in the face of any given stimuli, whether that action is to the benefit of the nation or its people or not. Alternatively, if we value civil liberties, we can come to some sort of halfway point where we implement a regular electoral system that allows for the government to be removed, incentivizing the creation of a multi-party state, but we write the parameters of the system such that the reins of power are always held by one like-minded group of individuals. This system would incentivize parties trying to at least appeal to the public, or those elements of the public that traditionally support them anyway, and it would probably lead us to create a democratic system with civil liberties that uses the first-past-the-post election system, a system where on a constituency-by-constituency basis, whoever gets more votes than the next guy wins. This wouldn't really be democratic because the overwhelming majority of people could vote for someone else and still be overruled, but hey, that's democracy for you. The other option is to come up with a system whereby the government is elected entirely proportionally, so that one vote for a party or an individual is exactly equal to any other vote, meaning that the sharing of power is distributed between groups as close to that group's share of the vote as possible. So if Party A and Party B get 60% and 30% of the vote respectively, they would get 60 and 30% of the power. In most democratic systems with proportional representation like this, substitute seats in the legislature for the power in that last sentence. There are other formations of government we can use too, but for our purposes we're going to consider the question of the government on a two-dimensional scale of autocratic versus democratic, and civil liberties versus, I don't know, not having civil liberties, I guess. It's unlikely we'd have a democratic system whereby there are no civil liberties, because that would entail everyone voting against their own interests consistently, but I guess it's not impossible. Anyway, given that it's just me and I really like spreadsheets, I'm thinking of making a system which isn't particularly democratic but maintains a veneer of free elections so that the international community doesn't come in and shut us down or whatever. We'd probably be here on the chart. My thought process is this: the government consists of a president who has absolute power to do whatever they want forever, and at the end of their 4-year term a new president is appointed by the existing president, and that president can also be the president, so basically I'm just in charge forever. There's also a legislature like a council of deputies or something that can suggest laws but which I can ignore if I feel feel like it and which regularly gets re-elected. This is becoming less of a video essay and more of an empty power trip, and I don't know how to feel about it. So how do we do all that with the hammer? Well, that's easy. We have a couple of options. We can write all the laws required to make that happen by taping a pen to the hammer and just writing it down on a sheet of paper, or I can do what I did when I put together hit Twine game Eric Brungus tonight and use my hammer to type out the Constitution and all that on my keyboard. Because the rest of my plan, I'm going to go with the latter, because in a few minutes we're going to need access to the internet. So I cracked on and typed out the Constitution with the hammer, setting up all of the civil liberties that the public didn't have unless I felt like they could have them, and giving myself absolute legislative and executive power and all that. A few hours later and we have a constitution and a few prospective laws that we can pass, just as soon as I take on absolute power. The election system is fairly straightforward. There's a hammer and you whisper your vote to the hammer, and the hammer promises to definitely record your vote fairly, and then after polls close I just randomly choose whoever I feel like to be in the legislature. So with that done, I use the hammer and an ink pad that I found to paint a neat flag to go at the top of all of our official correspondence. The red represents the lack of effort that went into this flag. Another law sets out that the location I described as the territory of the country, so that's step 2 definitely done. I also made regulations about citizenship to make sure we hit point 1. Finally, we need to be able to actually form international relations with other states, so to make sure that it's at least possible without actually having to do it, I went back to my keyboard with my hammer and I made a WordPress site for the country, which I'm provisionally calling the Principality of Hammergoing-Burr, even though there isn't a prince for it to be a principality of, with a neat little form hooked into my email address so that if people want to request diplomatic relations they can. That means we have the capacity to, even if we don't ever actually do it, meaning we've checked all 4 points on the list and the Principality of Hammergoing-Burr is technically a country. I win, you lose, please subscribe. Have you made a country in a similar way? Do you have a better suggestion for a country name than mine, which I put no effort into? Do you want to complain to me like I'm some sort of Ofcom for disappointing YouTube content? Let me know in the comment section below so that I can ignore your input and do whatever I was previously planning to do anyway. Goodbye.